Good evening. This is Quintus Curtius. Welcome back to the podcast. And this podcast will be another movie roundup. We'll talk about the epic war film 1917 and maybe a couple other movies if I feel like it. Seen a few recently, some very good, some mediocre, some terrible, kind of the usual mix. So we'll see how I feel about it after I get through 1917. If my tolerance level is sufficiently high to talk about some of the others. You know, one of the things about doing movie discussions or reviews, it's that so many of the movies are just not satisfying. They're just not good, and sometimes I feel like even talking about them is just somehow, I don't know, undignified or just an exercise in futility. You know, talking about something of no consequence seems to be a talk of no consequence. so I don't know. I mean, I in some ways I want to warn people about the good movies and the bad movies, but on the other hand, talking about some of these terrible films is just you just somehow feel demeaned by it. In any case, we'll see. Let's first talk about 1917. 1917. This is an epic war film that's currently in theaters right now. Came out this year, and it's directed and was directed, written, and produced by the British director Sam Mendes. And apparently, this story in this film is based on a story that was told to him by his paternal grandfather. So the story involves basically it's an Odyssey type war drama. It's about the journey of two dispatch runners, two message carriers, two British message carriers who are assigned the job of warning a certain command not to undertake an attack in a certain sector because that attack has already been compromised. It's a trap. The German army has identified the attack to take place, and if the attack goes through, it's going to be a slaughter. So you have these two dispatch runners who are assigned the job of contacting this unit in a different sector of the front and telling them to stand down. And you know, things like this happened in World War One, even in the Second World War. You know, in the days before reliable communications. I mean, there were field telephones and there were ways of communicating, but nothing like now. The level of communications was not as reliable as things are now. Even in the Second World War, there are examples that units using carrier pigeons, if you can believe that, and carrying messages to and from the front was an important job. It was an important job. And those of you who have read about the war know this. So that's the plot. That's the plot to this movie. And the director uses this bare bones of a plot to pull us into a drama of two young men. Their names are Schofield and Blake. On this journey through no man's land and into the belly of the beast, in the hopes that they can arrive in time at their destination to prevent a catastrophe. So it's a very compelling plot. It's very well done. And the movie has a lot of attractions to it. It presents us with a very taut episode of sort of a journey through hell. And the camera shows these two young men going through no man's land, going into the shell holes and the rotting corpses and the rats, and they get into an abandoned German trench and they find it booby-trapped, and they go through all these different hardships and tribulations. And that can make for a very compelling story. So at the level of storytelling, this is a very, very good movie, and I'm going to recommend it. I'm going to recommend it, obviously, because I think just for the quality of being a good storytelling film, it succeeds. Now, I'm probably going to be in the minority here to a lot of guys, and to say that there's something, though, a little bit unsatisfying, though, about 1917 that I just kind of wished I kind of wish I didn't have to talk about, but I think just for the sake of honesty, I think it needs to be talked about. I'm just so tired of these Hollywood war dramas where every face, every actor in these dramas looks like they're a well-fed, well-built guy that was born in 1990 or 1985, and everyone is healthy, and the uniforms look like they were all just taken off the rack in the Hollywood dressing sets, and the uniforms look like they were just made to order for the movie. I mean, everything just looks unrealistic. Everything just looks too good. It doesn't have that grit, that stink of desperation, that the feel that you got when you saw Oliver Stone's Platoon from 1986, where he made his actors live in the field for a couple of weeks. He made them go through hardships. He made them eat sea rations. He made them go through sleep deprivation. And again, maybe these criticisms are misplaced. Maybe these criticisms are middling, or maybe this is just me being cantankerous. I don't know, but I have to tell you what I think. It's a good movie. It's worth seeing. It's a compelling story. But, at the same time, I really don't think that the definitive World War I war film has yet been made. That movie has not yet been made. It's still up to some future director to do it. And I'm hoping that we get to see it. I'm hoping that I get to see it in my lifetime. Because if it was me, if I had a budget of hundreds of millions and I was going to do it, I would pick as a starting point Ernst Junger's Storm of Steel. That's the movie that needs to get made. That's the novel that needs to get made into a movie. Not novel, but that's the memoir that needs to get made into a movie. I don't know if we'll ever see it. In some ways, I think it's probably not something that anyone would dare to do, because I think for many reasons there are sentiments in that book that are not up to speed with what's politically allowed. Political correctness, I think, is allows us to do. I think there's probably a warrior ethic that's expressed in that memoir that is not exactly welcome these days. But I don't know. I just found some things about 1917 irritating and off-putting. I don't think there's a scene at the end, for example, where you've got the main character running along the trench line, perpendicular to the attacking forces, through just, and there's explosions going off, and bodies just kind of flying through the air. It's just not realistic. It's not the way it was. It's not realistic. The real war was far, far, far more violent, more horrible, more grimy, more muddy. Now I understand that no film can ever do justice to the way things really were, but I just don't think that any director has made the same effort at getting to the truth the way, say, Oliver Stone got to the truth of the Vietnam War from the perspective of the grunts, by putting his actors through that boot camp and actually having a down and dirty view of the war. Maybe it's too late. Maybe the First World War is so far removed from modern consciousness that anyone who had a personal stake in that movie is long gone. Maybe the time to make a movie like this was in the 1950s or 40s. But in those days, ultra-realism was not really permitted, really, in the studios. People didn't want to see that. People weren't prepared to see that. But I still think that realism is something that we really need. And again, I in some ways I feel a little bit guilty about criticizing this movie too much, because it's a well done film. It's very well done. It's technically a very impressive movie. They've got some ruined some ruined villages, some ruined cities, of very well done battlefield sets. But at the same time, there's just something very conventional about it. There's something very non-daring about it. It's very conventional. It's a straightforward, old school war film where, saddle up, Ben. Let's go let's go do this. Let's go do that. It's a very party line movie in some ways. And I don't know. I think that in some ways we need in our war films, we need the movies that explore the darker side. We need the gray areas. We need the complexities. We need the grime, the grit, the horrors. We need that. We need that all wrapped up in a package of ultra realism, in my view. And 1917, as impressive as it is, and I'm going to recommend it, does not really reach that bar. Again, judge for yourself. Don't take my word, as gospel about this. Judge for yourself, see for yourself. But there's just a little bit, you watch these two protagonists, the two actors that play Schofield and Blake, and they look like strapping, well-fed, well-nourished, modern British guys. They don't look like what Englishmen looked like in 1917. They would have been much shorter. If they had been in the war for a much longer time, they would have been malnourished. Their teeth would have been crooked. They would have spoken with extreme accents. So it's just, little things like that. Just the lack of realism just got on my nerves. The lack of realism just got on my nerves after a while. And, there are just some formulaic scenes in there. You've got the sort of the comrade dying in the other guy's arms with a long dramatic monologue, leading up to the death. It just every cliche I felt. Not every cliche, but there were just a lot of cliches. There's a scene where he, of course, the cliche where he helps some French girl living in a hovel and gives milk and helps a baby. Just these. I felt like I was being manipulated. And I didn't feel like we were getting to the heart of the truth about the First World War. Again, now maybe there are those who hear this and say, well, Quintus, that's not what the director's goal was. He wasn't trying to get at the truth of anything. He was just trying to tell a story. And that's okay. All right. That's fine. I accept that. But if you're going into 1917 expecting a World War I version of, say, Platoon or Apocalypse Now or a movie that's going to explore philosophical issues about the nature of war, the nature of conflict, man's conflict with himself, the nature of the dark side, you're not going to see that in this movie. This is basically a very, very conventional, ramrod straight, conventional type of film, which I think in many ways is designed, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to reinforce the conventional wisdom about duty, honor, and sacrifice. There's no gray areas here in 1917. There's no dark side. There's no ambiguity as we find in the real world. There's no ambiguity in 1917, and I felt like this was a drawback. So I understand that my review of this movie has really been more complaints than really maybe talking about the film itself, but that's what I'm supposed to do. That's what I'm here for. You don't need someone just to get up here and cheerlead about this movie. You need to know all the different viewpoints, and that's what I want to do. So I'm going to recommend 1917. I'm going to recommend it, but understand what you're getting. And I will just leave you with this. I'm hopeful for the future that we will get to see that movie about the First World War that we've been waiting for decades and decades and decades to see. Maybe it will happen. Some director needs to bring Ernst Junger's memoirs to the screen, or any of the great memoir writers of the First World War. Siegfried Sassoon comes to mind. No one has really done this yet. No one has really done it effectively. And maybe they can't. Maybe the truth is just so dark and just so horrifying that in many ways I don't think people really can wrap their minds around it. But it's something to aspire to. Something to aspire to. All right, so that'll conclude 1917. Let's talk about one or two other movies here. This next movie I'm going to talk about is called Earthquake Bird, and you can find it on Netflix. It's a 2019 psychological thriller written and directed by Wash Westmoreland, and it's based on a novel by Susanna Jones. And it stars Alicia Vikander, Riley Keough, Naoki Kobayashi, and Jack Houston. Probably none of those names really mean much to you, but this is what prompted me to see this movie was the description that I saw of it on Netflix. It's set in 1989 Tokyo, and it involves the dramatic exploits of a young female expat who's suspected of murder when her friend goes missing. And it's a movie about a love triangle with a Japanese guy involved. And, I figured it was worth watching because I think in some ways it connects with my era. I had the good luck of visiting Japan in the early 90s for a couple of years. And even though this movie is set in 1989, the early 90s are a few years, it's within a few years of that time frame. So it's nice to see the clothing, the music, the costumes, the clubs, the whole ambiance. It kind of brings back nice memories. But this movie, it's not bad. It's not a bad film. It's basically what you really have is a love triangle. This mysterious Swedish girl, played very well by the real good thing. The only good thing about this movie is the performance by Alicia Vikander, and she plays a very doe-eyed, very very sort of elusive type of personality. Speaks Japanese very very well, extremely well. And she falls in love falls in infatuation with this Japanese guy who's a cameraman, likes to take pictures. And pretty soon, another girl enters the picture, and then there's all these psychological dynamics involving the three of them. And I think what the strength of this movie is it reveals the psychological motivations of different people at different times, and shows how people who cannot come to grips with their shortcomings and cannot control their weaknesses are headed for disaster. And so that is a good lesson, I suppose, that this movie teaches us. But there's just something missing in this movie. It never really takes off. It never really grips us on a gut level. And you always feel like it's kind of a work in progress. You never really get the sense that it comes together. It never really comes together to amount to anything. So I'm forced to not recommend Earthquake Bird unless you really have a specific reason to see this movie. If you like Japan, if you like this time period, if you're interested in these kind of psychological thrillers, it's probably worth seeing. It's not a bad film. I think it got something like 51% on Rotten Tomatoes. So it's definitely a mixed reviews, but those who are not interested in this sort of thing can probably pass on it. All right, and let's then talk. All right, and the final film, and I hesitate even to review this movie or even talk about it. It was so bad. It was called Furthest Witness. This is a movie that came out in 2017 called Furthest Witness. And it's another movie I saw on Netflix. It's directed by Adam Del Guidice, Giudice. And this is just a terrible movie. It stars people you've never heard of. Let's see who's even in it. It looks like Aaron Stanford, Sean Patrick Flannery, Terry Reeves, and Forrest Fire, Fyre. But this is basically just a movie about a guy who does his own sort of private witness relocation business. He relocates people with problems over the border to Mexico, and then he suddenly becomes framed for a kidnapping that he didn't do, and then all these bad guys are on his trail, and to complicate things, he falls in love, or he falls in lust with a girl that he's assigned to relocate. So it's just a real mess. It's just a real. This is a pure B movie. This is a pure B movie. And if you like this sort of thing, if you just want something on in the background as you prepare your dinner, you can do probably a lot worse. But this is just not a movie I'd recommend. It's basically just junk. It's just a B movie action junk film. But, you know, not every movie can be good. And it's movies like this that have to remind us of the good ones. So those are the three movies that we talked about here. We've got 1917, Earthquake Bird, and Furthest Witness. See them if you want. Check them out. Take my opinion with a grain of salt, and search out your own movies. Get in there and explore. Get in there and experiment, and form your own ideas, your own opinions. All right, that will wrap up our film roundup here for January 12th. I'm Quintus Curtius. Good night.